Have you ever wondered why a fragrance cheapie is as cheap as it is versus a fragrance that's like $400 to $500? Well, today we're going to be talking about exactly that, exposing industry secrets or just getting educated a little bit as to how much it costs to actually make perfumes and what's entailed. What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the Aromatics Show. This is the podcast where we talk all things fragrance and some. But for today, I really want to focus more so on fragrances, their costs, how much it costs to actually make fragrance, all the ingredients that will compose a fragrances, and a few questions that I've seen in my audience and questions that have been asked to me. So a little bit of a backstory for me is I create my own fragrances as well. I've made my collaboration fragrance with French Avenue. You can check that out. It's Aromatics. And the thing that we pride ourselves in that is high quality ingredients at affordable prices. So niche quality, if you will, super high quality. And we'll get into all of that and what really, dictates a fragrance and being like niche quality, if you will, or high quality, etc. And so throughout the years of composing fragrance, working with a bunch of naturals, etc., I've amassed a certain knowledge base on that. Also, I have had a lot of time around manufacturing perfumery, especially more recently too. I just got back from France, from one of the manufacturers that's based in France, a big flavor house. And essentially, that's kind of what they all are. They also work on flavorings, not just in the way you smell them or taste them, but also in the way you smell them on. And so there's a reality to fragrancing and their costs, their compositions, and also a lot of the things that we also pay for when we buy a fragrance. Now, what are you actually buying when you're buying a fragrance? Are you buying a certain level of quality? Are you also paying for a certain level of marketing? And our price structures, or how our pricing structures really composed. So that's basically where we're going to be diving into. It's a pretty loaded question as to like how much the fragrances actually cost, how much should they cost, why do they cost what they cost, and we're going to be diving into that topic exactly here today. So one of the first questions that I wanted to answer is number one being, what are really the primary ingredients in a fragrance formula, and how do their costs vary? And the first answer to that question would be that the main fragrance or formulation is usually just essential oils, aroma chemical compounds, and solvents like alcohol. So the solvents are basically the liquids that you're going to be placing the oils into. So for instance, if you're going to be using water base, then obviously the solvent will be water, and that'll be much, much cheaper than something like alcohol. Now, there's also fixatives as well that are being used, and fixatives purposes could also, really help with performance, aid in changing the scent profiles, etc. But for most of these, the costs vary very, very widely. So, for example, a natural essential oil can be very, very expensive because of extractions and availability. So, for instance, if we wanted to extract or use the note of rose, and more specifically, let's go deeper into that, rose absolute. Now, in order for us to get rose absolute, we would have to wait for the right time, the right season. We would have to wait for the proper, batches of roses. We would also have to pay for that intensive labor, or the intensive work labor that goes into extracting some of those oils. The distillation, whether it be through steam distillation, keeping those oils. We have to pay the farmers who pick the roses, the tanks that are used and reserved to extract those oils, etc. And you get the idea. So the labor intensity in that is going to cost a lot more than something that's synthetic and synthesized. And that's why in a realm of like perfumery, and with a lot of businesses in this, there is a business aspect to this of how do we achieve or accomplish something very similar, right, with a lower cost, with something that's more efficient as well, and ultimately more bang for buck. It's not always the case that the business person behind this is thinking of the consumer, but more so, I want to achieve this for a lower price. Now, with that being said, is the availabilities of synthetics. But there's also another factor to this one as well. For instance, if we can only get, and don't take this as an exact, if we can only get Rose Absolute during the seasons, right? I'm not an expert in agriculture or anything like that. But let's say, for instance, just an example, if rose was, most prevalent or prominent during like July through August, then it would only be possible for us to extract Rose Absolute during those months. Now, let's say, for instance, we want to mass produce a fragrance not in those very specific months. First off, that might be a reality that also hikes up the price. Well, that idea in itself birthed synthetics. And synthetics in themselves can be of benefit, but you do also lose a lot of quality to the scent profile. But what this kind of does and did was unlock a whole new realm of perfumery and affordability. And in the right hands, it's offered us a cheaper realm in perfumery. And in the wrong hands, it's just offered lower quality fragrances for marked up prices. Now, in the case where those absolutes are used, you get something outstanding. And the reality of it is, guys, is that synthetics can only get so close, just like if we were to compare a fragrance dupe to an original. It's just not the same. Obviously, you can only synthesize to a certain extent or to a certain level. And nowadays, there are chemicals that you can literally use and just extract a fragrance by immersing this chemical or whatever compound you want to get the scent of in this liquid. And in fact, when I was in Italy or in France in February, we saw that take place with the extraction of the scent of a cookie. It was crazy. It was absolutely wild. And so we are getting closer to getting better qualities for more efficient and lower prices. But I don't know about you guys. I haven't really seen many of the prices go down. This could still, it's relatively new technology and it is what it is. But, anyways, so that's one of the costs or ways you can lower costs, but you do sacrifice a certain level of finesse. I don't want to say quality per se, because they could still technically be high quality, but certain level of richness and depth. And it really depends on how you define quality. If you if you define quality as naturals, then yeah, it does lower quality. For me personally, just for the sake of this video and for the sake of this argument, I'm going to say that, yeah, naturals are going to be our benchmark for quality when we're talking about Rose Absolute. So yes, you do compromise in quality. But like I said, that is a way to lower costs. Now, when we're talking about solvents like alcohol, etc., there are still some companies, and I advise those who are creating perfumes to not use any impure alcohols that might have some moisturizing agents, etc. And these are actually produced and promoted by some manufacturers, smaller manufacturers who don't have alcohol licenses, for example, and they're able to sell these, and they push it on as to and this spiel about better for your skin. It has moisturizing agent, but in fact, this moisturizing agent will taint every single fragrance, and you can smell it across the boards through all of them, and it will definitely compromise the scent profile. It's cheaper because it's easier and more accessible. They don't have to get a license to sell those. So that's another drop in those as well. Now, with the aroma chemicals and essential oils, although you will technically get something that smells more naturalistic and higher quality, it's not always the best thing to use because of longevity. For instance, something of essential oil might not last as long as a synthetic compound. Now, in those cases, you can obviously, compound it with a fixative, which will help aid in it, but still to a certain degree. So although you might be spending a lot, if it doesn't last, then it kind of counteracts. And the whole spiel really gets, it can get pretty complex. But for the most part, that's usually what it comes down to in terms of the primary ingredients and the rules. Now, the other question might be, how do these naturals compares to synthetics in terms of the costs, which we kind of already touched on. But the naturals are generally speaking more expensive due to, obviously, like we stated, labor intensive, the farming, the extraction, which we got to see all that process. It was very interesting, and it takes a lot of resources, manpower, and all that stuff. And then along with their limited availability, as emphasized earlier on with like the whole, being in season, etc. So the synthetic ingredients, it can definitely, lead to more efficient and lower costs. Simple as that. Also, this is something important to note when it comes to formulations with a lot of people who are concerned with reformulations, etc. It's almost inevitable, especially when you're, faced with a lot of older fragrances or just fragrances in general that use naturals, is it will almost always seem like the next batch is reformulated because there's no way to ensure or guarantee that this batch is going to have the same exact extraction or quality of scent extracted from this year's rose versus next year's rose. And that's only one composition of the fragrance, right? We have multiple oils. So you will almost never get the same exact scent in any fragrance unless it's completely synthetic from A to Z. I know, mind blown. This is one of the topics that I was actually mind blown, and I only learned as we took a tour in the Fragrance Museum in the capital of the world of perfumery in Grasse, France. So another technical question, and this is for those of you who might be a little deeper in terms of the sales aspect, is that what role does the scale of production play in determining the overall cost? Meaning, what role does creating 10,000 fragrances, right? Or having batch one with 10,000 fragrances versus a batch of 2,000 fragrances create in terms of cost? And it's one that's significant. And that's why it's proposed as a question. And honestly, the scale of production affects it significantly. So, for example, if I were to create 10,000 pieces of, let's say, for instance, this fragrance here, now the cost of production is going to be significantly lower because of the fact that the manufacturers are, rather than, let me rephrase this a little bit. So rather than this manufacturer who's going to create this for me, cleaning up their machinery and using their labors and forces to create 2,000 bottles and go through all of that work for a short time a span, they'll likely charge me, let's use the X factor of 2,000. Let's just use $2,000. They'll probably charge me around $2,000 to create those 2,000 pieces. Now, if I were to create 10,000 pieces all at $1 each, they'll likely give me a discount at around, say, 75 cents each or 80 cents each. Reason being is it's time consuming. They get to secure a larger sum in the total cost, and also it's not as tedious to go and clean their machinery, prep, etc., just in order to make 2,000 pieces. So large scale production often costs, or reduces the cost per unit due to the economies of scale, lower raw material costs, and more efficient use of labor and resources. And that's what it comes down to, is efficiency. And that's valuable. So small batches still have higher costs because of a lack of efficiency. Simple answer to that. So yes, it will take more money. It will cost more money up front, but you will ultimately save money. And that's something also to consider. More of a technical point in question, but yes, definitely. So the other question is, are there significant costs associated with the equipment and technologies needed for fragrance production? And oh my God, this is probably one of the most expensive portions of creating fragrances. So the level of, just complexity of some of those machines and robots that I saw while visiting some of these manufacturers are just mind blowing. And just calculating all these costs and things and just thinking to myself, what would it take for me to open a factory like this? It's at least $100 million, man. The initial capital investment in equipment like the distillation units, the blending machinery, and not to mention like just the labor to get it, the freaking farmland and all this stuff. It's substantial to say the least. But the advanced technologies also for quality control doesn't just stop there. Formulation development, like there are so many costs to doing it with the equipment, new leading research into new technologies like that chemical compound that extracts the scent profiles from something like a cookie. Like, it's just mind-blowing. It never ends, and you always want to expand, because as soon as you've thought of something, somebody might have already done it. And so that's kind of the competition that these flavor houses have amongst each other. How can we progress? How can we produce better? How can we create synthetics that get closer to naturals, et cetera? But those distilleries, some of these places are using machines that are ancient. And because of its cost, and because if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Sometimes it does it even better. Okay. Another more simple question would be something like, how do packaging choices impact overall cost? This is something that I've actually, been in constant discussions with brand owners, even myself, wanting to compromise on packaging, depending on the consumer experience with packaging, and lowering costs to make it more profitable, more accessible, and what are the importance for packaging. For me personally, I feel packaging is very important to a certain degree. Ultimately, it should be tossed away, but some people actually like to collect them. And for brand reputation and just prestige, packaging, I think, does make a difference. It's kind of a dilemma in the cheaper realm with a lot of brand owners wanting to give premium packaging, but also wanting to keep the costs low. But packaging definitely can be significant. So, with high-end bottles, special designs, airless pumps, the sprayers, yeah, absolutely, it'll increase the expenses. There's all environmentally friendly or luxurious packaging. These all can be things that increase the prices, right? So the other question I personally might have is, or you, is what are the labor costs, right? The actual labor costs. This is significantly high depending on the route you take. So the labor costs will include something like salaries for the perfumers, salaries for production staff, quality control personnel, and I mean, the level of expertise will definitely drive them higher. And that's why you'll see some brands use the branding of a celebrity perfumer, and some brands you'll never see a perfumer attached. Is there still a perfumer to it? Absolutely. More often than not, a lot of these dupes or something that smells close is actually given to by a manufacturer of an oil factory, a flavor house, along with a perfumer. Just not something that they're necessarily proud of or paying for a premium to be able to use this master perfumer, or sorry, the celebrity perfumer is what I rather meant to say. So yeah, that's with the labor. It gets pretty damn expensive. Now, another one is regulation requirements. Does this affect the cost? I found this one to be interesting to include as well. But compliance and safety and labeling, it does add through costs, through documentations, certifications. These are all things that get swept under the rug. Certification processes, especially in places like Europe, they have strict cosmetics regulations. And these you can be expensive and costly, especially when these products are being shipped all the way from countries like Dubai, from France, from Italy. It gets pretty expensive, but it's pretty clear cut. Another one is the importance of branding and marketing and the overall cost structure of fragrance. This is a big one. This is a big one, and this goes into very popular brands who do a lot of marketing for branding, who do a lot of campaigns, and somebody's got to pay for it. You or whoever else is going to purchase it has to pay Johnny Depp's salary. Johnny Depp isn't going to pay himself to sit here and hold a fragrance and say, hey, buy this fragrance. Or what is his name? Pharrell Williams, right? So, of course. So in terms of the branding and marketing, it's significant. It's actually one of the most significant impacts. Now let's go into like the raw ingredients for something like Ambre Nuit. This is an Esprit de Parfum. I think it's an Extrait de Parfum. Has a lot of naturals in it. The cost of this would definitely be high. But I would imagine that it wouldn't cost more than around $40 max. But there's a lot of high quality ingredients, at least in my opinion. Something like this right here, it's Afternoon Swim, has a lot of naturals as well. Probably the same. Maybe even cheaper to produce than this. Now something like Myriad, this is a couple of components to this one. You have what is a more of an artistic piece right here. It's a sculpture on the top. It's magnetized, but it also has some high quality ingredients like oud. It's not necessarily that dosed high up, but it is expensive. So production for this is really, ultimately, it's going to come down to what are you buying this for? Are you buying it for the perfume, or are you buying it for the sculpture and the quality of oud, etc.? So at this point, you already know what you're getting. You're paying for the art as well. So somebody's got to pay for these architectures placing this. It makes sense. You're also paying for the quality. So now the cost for this, it could significantly be up there, right? Somebody's got to pay the sculpture. It could be up to like, let's say $80 to $100, maybe even, $80 to $100. Now at that point, the rest of the markup is for, marketing, etc., obviously at that point. But when we're actually just talking about straight up fragrance, something like this, it smells a lot like something like Bulgari Tiger, right? Except, how many of you guys have heard of Ramon Blazar, right? And so their cost in branding and marketing, it's not that high. For that reason, you get what seems like an A to B tier quality of oils, very high quality, very long lasting, smells in the same realm of quality of something like Bulgari Tiger. But Bulgari Tiger, being a high brand and prestigious name, has a lot of branding, a lot of overhead cost, etc. Now the cost of this, let's say, is around $18, maybe even $15, sometimes even $14. The cost of Bulgari Tiger, I'd say around $20, right? With the magnetic cap, etc. But the branding cost then tackled on, you can do the math, right? Ramon Blazar versus Bulgari. And then there's also a portion of where you're paying for the prestige of having the name brand. So definitely significantly impacts the fragrance costs. Developing the brand reputation, promotional campaigns, advertisements, just like everything else in the world, is a large portion of the budget. This is probably one of the biggest reasons of cost. So the retail price of the product. And I mean, if you guys look at the reality of it, everything we buy in life is not because we want to, it's because it's told like you buy this, like you buy Kellogg's, you don't buy Millville. We buy, Honda or Toyota. We know Hanes, Fruit of the Loom. I'm sure there are other brands who make cereal who are good. There are other brands who make underwear who are good, but we only ever see these, I mean, at least most repetitively. And it's because of brand and marketing power and recognition, Louis Vuitton, etc. These are all reputation, branding, marketing through rappers, through whatever it may be. That's ultimately the reality of it. And we've been fed this since the beginning of marketing. So that's one of, if not the biggest portion and reality of it, right after ingredients. Okay. And this fact in itself can actually drive the costs anywhere from, rather than it costing 22, upwards of $150 to $200, because somebody has to pay for the branding and the marketing. All right, so getting close to the end here, how do raw material supply chain issues influence fragrance marketing costs? So supply chain, meaning availability, sourcing, is significant because, for instance, if there's climate change, if certain rules and regulations against farming or etc. leads to some kind of scarcity, the new costs could significantly shoot up, right? So if, for instance, IFRA deems a certain ingredient unsafe, now the costs of producing something, although synthetic, any obstacles really in general. I don't want to go too far into that one because that was a pretty weak example. But for instance, if Rose Absolute is scarce this year, it's going to cost twice as much as it did last year, right? And so that will definitely affect production cost as well. And lastly is going to be the seasonal variations of the specific pricing of a fragrance ingredient, which is all tied into the last thing I said. So, for instance, if you wanted to use Rose Absolute, if you wanted to use Oud, Oud is more so rather seasonal. It's more so based on availability. For example, Oud Assam, it's very widely used, and it's usually, watered down, if you will, and they just dilute it, essentially. It's usually out of stock. It's hard to find, especially in perfumery, unless you have anyway, supply chain and disruptions and increased demand obviously is going to result in price fluctuations based on demand and the harvest yields. So that's pretty much it in regards to how much they actually cost. So what this basically says is that it's absolutely possible to find fragrances that sell for around $50 that'll give you the similar quality of $500 fragrances. And that's not always the case. The objective reality has to come down to how many essentials and naturals are in this one and how many naturals are in this one. Now, is that a good thing? It really depends on the ingredients and what you're looking for. In some cases, it might not be. If you want a longer lasting fragrance, like this one doesn't last that long. And in some cases, it might be some synthetics in this, but it lasts all freaking day. Now, in that case as well, which one of these are branded harder? Obviously, you see this almost everywhere, and they have to pay those costs in branding and marketing. You don't hardly ever see this. It's a hidden gem, if you will. And because of that, it's more affordable. Costs of this one, higher quality ingredients potentially than some even more expensive designer fragrances. But the cost of marketing is virtually non-present. And so for that reason, it could be sold for much, much less. Now, the other thing as well is going to be in certain cases, this synthetics might actually favor over afternoon swim. Now, for me personally, I love a natural scent, but it really depends on your goal and what you like. Now, Imperial Blue, this one, I love it as well. Is it synthetic? It is. Is it headache inducing? Absolutely not. It still smells good. And some synthetics, especially nowadays, have come such a long way that saying synthetic, to me personally, used to be like, oh, screechy, headache inducing. And now it just means longer lasting because of the quality of synthetics that we've come to achieve at certain price points. Are there synthetics in this? There probably still is. There actually is. And there are fixative in this, like Cass Cologne, etc. So it's not just a natural fragrance. No, there are almost in every fragrance there's synthetic. There is. These just being maybe, a little bit more, and in turn, boosting the performance of the fragrance. Synthetics can actually enhance the fragrance in every way, and it's even used in this to do exactly that with. So that, for the most part, is how fragrances get their cost. If a fragrance is cheap, it's not always the fact that it's not always indicative of lower quality. It could potentially mean more synthetics rather, and it could also potentially mean still naturals, high quality, just not necessarily having some of those barriers and cost factors that some of these other brands do. You see Dior in a lot of commercials. That's not cheap. Also paying those celebrities, it's not cheap. And so it has to reflect that. So rather than taking that cost and making their typical and standard in the perfume industry of 4 to 5 times profit, it has to be based 4 to 5 times profit after they pay those millions and millions of dollars in perfumery or in branding and marketing, and that's their goal. Whereas this one, 4 to 5 times of their profit, just straight up off of their cost. That's it. Hey, you want to buy these and sell them? Sure. Well, I made it for about $12. Do you want to buy it for around 20? Sure. End of story. Versus, damn it, how much? You get the idea. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. This is pretty much the wrap up for this one. The goal of this one was to just talk more so about how much it actually costs, how much it could cost. There are a lot of variables and factors, as you can see from the breakdown. And if you're trying to create perfumes, or if you were interested and you found some value to this, make sure to like. If you're listening to this on Spotify, make sure to follow and subscribe to the channel on YouTube. And that's pretty much it. Thank you guys so much for watching and staying tuned into the Aromatics Show. I'll see you in the next one.